I want you to picture something for me. It's a cartoon banana, but this isn't, just a piece of fruit. It's standing on two legs, it's wearing a little graduation cap, and it's holding a paint palette and a brush.
Right, yeah.
It looks completely ridiculous. Honestly, it looks like the mascot for, I don't know, a spelling app you download for a toddler.
It does. It sounds incredibly silly. But that banana is actually the face of a pretty serious breakthrough in how we think about artificial intelligence and specifically scientific publishing.
Exactly. So welcome, everyone. I'm your host, and today we are doing a deep dive into a paper titled PaperBanana, Automating Academic Illustration for AI Scientists. And despite that goofy mascot we just described, this paper is attacking a problem that I think drives literally every researcher crazy.
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive pain point. I'm excited to get into the details with you today.
Because we have these massive large language models now, right? They can write complex code, they can analyze gigabytes of data, they can even write the raw text of a high-level research paper, but have you ever actually asked one of them to draw a methodology diagram?
It is usually a total disaster. You get this beautiful high-definition image, but then you look closely and the text is just alien gibberish. The arrows are pointing out into the void, and the logic, the actual science you're trying to convey is completely hallucinated.
Right. It's what we call the AI scientist paradox. They are absolute geniuses at text and code, but they have the visual communication skills of a hallucinating toddler. And that's a huge problem because, if you want to get published in top-tier venues like NeurIPS or ICML, you can't have broken, nonsensical diagrams.
Exactly. Visual communication has become the core bottleneck. Because currently, if you're a researcher and you want a top-tier diagram, you really only have two bad options. Option one, you use a standard generative AI like Midjourney or DALL-E, and you get something that looks pretty but is factually wrong.
And option two is you just do it yourself.
Right, using tools like TIC or Python PPTX.
And TIC is that latex package where you essentially have to code your drawing, right? I mean, it's basically like trying to paint by writing algebra.
It is incredibly labor-intensive. You spend hours nudging a box 2 pixels to the left. So the promise of PaperBanana and why we are taking this deep dive today is that it proposes an agentic framework to automate all of this.
It wants to take the dense, unstructured text of your methodology section and turn it into a professional, publication-ready figure without you lifting a finger.
That's the goal.
So today, we are going to tear apart this architecture. We're going to look at the underlying math, the specific agent hierarchy, and the empirical results. But I actually want to start with the core philosophy here. The authors define the task with a very specific mathematical formula. It's I equals F of S, comma C.
Yeah, it looks like a simple function, but that formula is doing a lot of heavy lifting conceptually. So I is the image. That's the final output, the goal. S is the source context. That's your raw text, maybe a few dense paragraphs describing your new algorithm.
Yeah.
And then C is the communicative intent.
Let's pause on that for a second. Communicative intent. Because usually when we prompt an AI, we just paste the text and say, visualize this. Why do they need a completely separate variable for intent?
Because a single block of dense scientific text can be visualized in like 10 different ways depending on what point you're trying to make. Let's say you have a paragraph describing a new machine learning model. You could draw a diagram focusing purely on the training speed.
Right.
Or you could draw one focusing on the hardware requirements. Or you could draw the actual neural network architecture. The intent, the C variable, acts as a constraint. In practice, it's usually the figure caption.
Okay.
You can tell the model, hey, ignore the hardware stuff in this text. I want a diagram specifically showing the data flow between the encoder and the decoder.
Got it. It's almost like hiring a freelance illustrator. You hand them the manuscript, which is S, and you give them the caption, which is C, and say, draw this specific thing.
That is a perfect analogy. And just like hiring a human team, PaperBanana doesn't just use one massive neural network to guess the pixels. It uses a team metaphor.
Right. It's not one black box. It's a squad of 5 specialized agents. And they split the job into 2 very distinct phases, planning and execution.
Exactly. So let's walk through that first phase, the linear planning phase, because this feels like the crucial step that standard image models completely skip.
They really do. So agent number 1 in this framework is the retriever agent. I like to think of it as the librarian. Its job isn't to draw anything at all. Its job is purely to find references.
But it's important to note that this isn't just a standard keyword search. It's not just Googling pictures of computers.
No, and this is a really critical mechanism to understand. The paper emphasizes that it uses something called generative retrieval.
Right. Standard retrieval usually looks for semantic similarity, basically matching the words. But generative retrieval in this specific context prioritizes visual structure.
Can you break that down a bit more? How does that work in practice?
Sure. Let's say your source text describes a sequential process. Step A leads to step B, which leads to step C. The retriever agent is actively looking through its database for existing diagrams that show a pipeline structure. It honestly doesn't care if the topic of those reference diagrams is marine biology or quantum physics.
It cares that the shape of the logic matches.
Exactly. It's looking for a structural template. It's essentially saying, show me what a feedback loop looks like in a professionally published paper.
That is fascinating. So it pulls these high-quality examples from a reference set, they call it R, and then it produces a curated set of examples, E, and it passes those examples to the next team member, agent number 2, the planner agent.
The architect of the group.
The architect, yeah. This agent uses in-context learning. It looks at the dense source text, S, and it studies those structural examples, E, that the librarian just found. Its entire job is to translate your unstructured paper text into a highly structured plan.
But here is the key detail that people miss.
Yeah.
The output of the planner agent is not an image. The output, which they label P, is a text description.
It's writing a blueprint.
Yes. It is literally listing out the entities in plain text. It writes, we need a box for the input module, we need a cylinder representing the database, and we need a solid black arrow connecting the two. It is organizing the information hierarchically before a single pixel is generated.
Okay, that makes sense. But a blueprint can still end up looking really ugly. You can have all the right boxes connected by all the right arrows, but if the boxes are neon green and the font is Comic Sans, I am not getting my paper accepted at NERIPS.
And that exact problem is why we have agent number 3, the stylist agent. Or, sticking with your analogy, the art director.
The art director.
Right.
Because academic papers definitely have a specific look. You know it instantly when you see it.
They absolutely do. Clean lines, specific aspect ratios, soft pastel colors, usually these very subdued blues, oranges, and greens, and crisp sans serif fonts. The stylist agent's job is to analyze that entire reference collection to synthesize aesthetic guidelines, or G.
Wait, so it creates a customized style guide on the fly?
In a way, yes. It basically calculates the median aesthetic of top-tier accepted papers. It's looking at the mathematical corner radius of boxes, it's looking at line thickness, it's extracting color palettes, and then it takes the planner's text blueprint and rewrites it.
Okay, so how does the prompt change?
So instead of the blueprint just saying, draw a blue box for the encoder, the stylist rewrites that instruction to be hyper-specific. It becomes, draw a rounded rectangle with a soft blue fill using hex code E6F3FF, give it a 2-point stroke, and label it with 10-point Arial font.
Wow. Okay, so before we have even attempted to generate an image, before any rendering happens, we've gone through 3 distinct layers of abstraction.
Correct.
First, the retriever found the structural template, then the planner built the logical blueprint, and third, the stylist applied the visual polish.
It's exactly how a high-end design agency works. You don't just hand a manuscript to an artist and say, go. You create a brief, you outline the structure, you establish a brand style, and then you draw.
And that whole sequence is what the paper calls the linear planning phase. They formalize the thinking step before the doing step.
Right.
So let's take a quick pause here for a recap. We are about a third of the way through this deep dive, and so far we haven't drawn a single pixel. We've moved from raw text to finding structural examples to a text-based plan to a styled text blueprint.
It's a very deliberate slowdown of the AI's natural impulse to just guess.
Exactly. And I want you, the listener, to think about your own workflow for a second. How often do you actually plan out a presentation slide in text, physically write down what needs to be on it before you start dragging boxes around in PowerPoint? PaperBanana is essentially forcing the AI to do that rigorous planning step.
Which sets us up perfectly for the next phase, because now we actually have this optimized description, which the paper labels P-star. It's the perfect, highly constrained prompt. Now we have to make the thing.
Right, which brings us to section 2 of the framework, the iterative refinement loop, or the execution phase. Introduce us to agent number 4.
Agent number 4 is the visualizer agent. This is the actual artist. This agent uses an underlying image generation model. In the paper's experiments, they specifically tested models they call PaperBanana Pro, as well as Gemini 3 Pro.
So this is the engine that actually pushes the pixels.
Yes. It takes that incredibly detailed style text description from the art director and renders it into a visual image. The output here is denoted as I sub t.
But see, this is exactly where standard AI pipelines usually fail, right? It renders the pixels, it inevitably makes a small mistake, maybe hallucinates a word, and then we're just stuck with a bad image.
That's the fatal flaw of single-pass generation, and that is exactly why agent number 5 is arguably the most important distinct feature of this entire framework. Agent 5 is the critic agent, the reviewer.
The reviewer. And this agent has veto power, doesn't it?
Absolute veto power. It acts as the ultimate quality control. It looks at the generated image that I sub t's, but here is the genius part. It doesn't just evaluate the image in isolation. Compare the image back to the original source text, S.
Oh, so it's playing a very high-stakes game of spot the difference between the picture and the manuscript.
Exactly. It's performing factual verification. It actively checks for hallucinations. It asks, did the visualizer add a processing module that isn't mentioned anywhere in the text? Did it misspell the word algorithm? Did it draw an arrow pointing from the output back to the input when the text clearly states it's a feed-forward network?
And if it finds those errors, does it just flag them and fail?
No, it's much more active than that. It writes out specific targeted feedback, and it actually modifies the text blueprint to create a new description, P sub t plus 1.
Oh, I see. So it dynamically updates the prompt based on the specific visual errors it detected.
Yes. And then this updated prompt goes back to the visualizer agent to try again. It's a closed feedback loop. Now, the paper specifies that they run this loop for exactly t equals 3 rounds.
Wait, why exactly 3? Why not just keep looping until the critic agent decides it's 100% perfect?
It comes down to diminishing returns and computational cost. The authors found that 3 rounds is the sweet spot. It's enough iterations to fix the major structural hallucinations and polish the text artifacts. If you push it beyond 3 rounds, you risk the model overcorrecting.
Like it gets stuck in an infinite loop of tweaking a color back and forth.
Exactly. Or it fixes one spelling error but breaks a connection somewhere else. 3 is the empirical balance between aesthetic improvement and technical accuracy.
Now, I want to bring up a very specific, almost hidden detail in the architecture that I thought was brilliantly practical. Up to this point, we've been talking about diagrams, right? Conceptual flowcharts, system architectures. But scientists also need to publish statistical plots. Bar graphs, scatter plots, line charts.
Right, data visualization.
And if you ask a standard image generator to draw a bar graph showing, say, 25% growth, it's going to paint a blue rectangle that kind of looks like growth. But mathematically, the height of that pixels might represent 30% or 20%. It's just guessing at the pixels.
It's entirely imprecise. And in scientific publishing, close enough it's just wrong. It's technically data fabrication if the bar doesn't match the number.
So how does PaperBanana handle that? Because drawing pixels for data seems inherently flawed.
They realize this too. So PaperBanana has a built-in mode switch. During the planning phase, when the planner agent realizes, oh, the communicative intent here is a statistical plot, not a conceptual diagram, the visualizer agent changes its behavior entirely.
It stops drawing.
It stops trying to generate an image from scratch. Instead, the visualizer writes executable Python code. Specifically, it writes code using the matplotlib library.
That is such a crucial distinction. It doesn't use neural networks to draw the chart. It uses neural networks to write the code that mathematically draws the chart.
Exactly, because Python code is purely deterministic. If your source text says the data point is exactly 25.4, the Python script will plot that dot at exactly 25.4 on the y-axis. Every single time.
So for abstract qualitative concepts, it paints pixels. But for hard quantitative data, it codes.
Right. And the critic agent is still there, but its role shifts. Instead of checking pixels for hallucinations, it's checking the generated code and the resulting plot to ensure the data was transcribed key for key from the text. It's a massive boost to data integrity.
It seems so obvious in hindsight, but treating conceptual diagrams and statistical plots as two fundamentally different computational tasks is a really big deal.
It completely solves the accuracy problem that has plagued AI-generated charts for years.
Okay, let's take a breath and do another quick recap of this entire machine. We have the retriever finding the examples, the planner outlining the logical structure, the stylist making it aesthetically pleasing, the visualizer rendering it or coding it if it's data, and the critic yelling at everyone until the output matches the science.
That's the framework in a nutshell.
But the big question is, does it actually work? Or is this just a wildly complicated, expensive way to make bad clip art?
That brings us right to section 3, evaluation. The authors knew they couldn't just eyeball a few diagrams and claim victory. They needed rigorous proof. So they built an entirely new benchmark called PaperBananaBench.
PaperBananaBench. I love how scientists name things. What exactly is in this benchmark?
They curated 292 highly complex test cases taken directly from NeurIPS 2025 publications. So we are talking about real, cutting-edge, high-level scientific concepts. It covers domains like agent reasoning, vision and perception, and applied science.
Okay, but how do you mathematically grade a diagram? Because if I ask you, is this a good illustration, that's highly subjective.
It is subjective. To solve that, they used a paradigm called VLM as a judge. They utilized Gemini 3 Pro, a vision language model, to act as an impartial evaluator. It looked at the AI's output and compared it directly to the original human-drawn figure from the published paper.
And what were the specific rubrics? How was it scoring them?
They scored the outputs across 4 specific metrics, and I think these 4 really define what we fundamentally mean by quality in science communication. The first one is faithfulness.
The truth metric.
Right. Does the image contradict the source text? The paper refers to this as a red line rule. If you have a hallucination, if the AI invents a neural network module that literally does not exist in the paper, you get a 0.
Because it doesn't matter how pretty the diagram is if it's lying about the science.
Exactly. The second metric is conciseness.
This one is interesting to me because LLMs love to yap. They love to just generate huge walls of text.
They do. They'll try to put entire paragraphs inside a tiny flowchart box. But a good diagram needs keywords, not full sentences. Conciseness measures how well the model distilled the dense information down to the absolute visual essentials.
Makes sense. What's the third?
Third is readability. This is all about visual logic and cognitive load. Do distinct colors cleanly separate different functional modules? For example, if the encoder block is blue, is the decoder block distinctly orange? Can your eye naturally follow the arrows without getting lost in a maze?
It's the user experience of the diagram.
Precisely. And finally, the fourth metric is aesthetics.
The beauty score. Does it look professional? Does it have that harmonious, polished academic look? Or does it look like a chaotic napkin sketch? So if I can jump in with a question for you, the listener. Think about those 4 metrics. Faithfulness, conciseness, readability, aesthetics. If you had to judge a diagram for your own work, would you personally value beauty aesthetics or accuracy, faithfulness more? Because historically, using standard AI, we usually have to trade one for the other.
But PaperBanana is trying to maximize both simultaneously. So to answer your earlier question of does it work, they put PaperBanana up against a vanilla model baseline.
Meaning they just gave a standard AI the text and said, draw this diagram without any of the agents.
Exactly. And the results weren't even close. PaperBanana crushed it. The overall score improved by plus 17.0%.
Wow.
But you have to look at the specific breakdowns to see why. Conciseness jumped by an incredible 37.2%.
37%. So that planner agent is really doing its job. It is aggressively stripping out the noise and the yapping before it ever reaches the canvas.
It is. And readability went up by almost 13%. But honestly, my absolute favorite statistic in this entire paper is the human blind test.
Oh, they brought in human judges.
Yes. They took the generated diagrams and showed them to human domain experts. But they didn't tell them which image was made by the vanilla AI and which was PaperBanana. The human experts preferred the PaperBanana output 72.7% of the time.
What about the vanilla model?
The vanilla model only won 6% of the time. The rest were ties.
72-6. That is an absolute massacre.
It really validates the whole agentic approach. It mathematically proves that breaking the problem down into planning, styling, and critiquing is vastly superior to just prompting a black box and praying for a good result.
The paper does include some visual case studies that I think are worth describing. I was looking at case 1, which was a methodology diagram. The vanilla model produced this really cluttered, verbose flowchart using these very outdated, depressing gray tones.
It looked like a textbook from 1995.
It really did. But the PaperBanana version was completely different. It used these modern, soft blues and oranges. But more importantly, it used visual blocks to group related concepts. It put all the lens module stuff in one colored container and all the reasoning module stuff in another. It visually organized the logic, making it instantly clearer to the reader.
And in case 2, which focused on statistical plots, PaperBanana actually slightly outperformed the human-created originals in terms of conciseness and aesthetics.
Yeah.
Because it follows strict, mathematically defined, code-based styling rules, its charts are perfectly aligned and formatted every single time.
It's wild to think an AI can format a chart better than a grad student. but the paper is honest. It lists some distinct failure modes. It's not a perfect system yet.
No, there are still bugs. The most prominent issue they found is what they call connection errors.
Right. Sometimes the arrows just point to the wrong box entirely.
Yes. The logic of the diagram breaks down visually. And what's interesting is that the critic agent, the reviewer that's supposed to catch this, sometimes misses these specific subtle errors.
Why is that? If the critic is so rigorous, how does an arrow pointing backwards slip through?
The authors attribute it to perception limitations in the underlying foundation model. The vision language model looking at the generated image sometimes just literally cannot see the tiny arrowhead correctly in the pixel soup of the image, so it assumes it's correct and signs off on a fundamentally flawed diagram.
You know, that phrase, pixel soup, brings us to section 5, the limitations. And honestly, this is the biggest elephant in the room for me. It's what I call the raster problem.
Oh yes, this is the absolute deal breaker for a lot of working scientists right now.
So PaperBanana generates images, raster graphics. We're talking JPEGs or PNG files.
Right, grids of pixels.
But if you are an academic submitting a paper to a journal, or if you're building a massive slide deck for a conference, you don't really want raster images. You want vectors. You want SVG files.
Exactly. Can you explain the functional difference for listeners who might not be graphic designers? Why is vector so crucial?
Absolutely. So a raster image is basically a static mosaic of colored dots. If you zoom in, it gets blurry and pixelated. But more importantly, the text is baked into the picture. So imagine it's 10 minutes before the submission deadline, and you suddenly realize there's a typo in the word algorithm right in the middle of your flowchart.
A nightmare scenario.
Right. With a raster image, you can't just click on the word and type the letter M. The text isn't text anymore. It's just blue pixels shaped like letters. You would have to rerun the entire PaperBanana prompt and pray it generates the exact same layout, but with the spelling fixed.
Which it might not do.
Exactly. But a vector image, like an SVG, is a set of mathematical instructions. It says, draw a blue line from coordinate X to coordinate Y and render this text string in Arial. It is infinitely scalable, so it never gets blurry, and crucially, it is fully editable in tools like Illustrator or PowerPoint.
And the authors fully acknowledge this limitation. Since current diffusion models fundamentally generate pixels, they suggest a temporary workaround of generating the images at ultra-high 4K resolution, so they at least don't look blurry when printed.
But that doesn't solve the editability problem.
No, it doesn't. But they do tease a future direction that I think is the holy grail here. They propose building a reconstruction pipeline.
How would that work? Are they talking about reverse engineering the pixels back into math?
Exactly that. The idea is to take the final raster image produced by PaperBanana, run an optical character recognition OCR model over it to extract the text strings, use advanced image segmentation to identify the exact boundaries of the shapes and arrows, and then compile all that data to rebuild the image from scratch as an editable PowerPoint file or an SVG.
Wow. If they can crack that, if they can build a seamless pipeline that goes from unstructured text to agent team to a raster image and finally outputs a fully editable PowerPoint slide, then this tool becomes universally adoptable overnight.
It would completely change the workflow of every lab in the world, which leads right into the current workflow the authors actually recommend, which they call generate and select.
Right, because they know you can't blindly trust the AI to get it perfectly right on the very first try.
Exactly. The advice is to use the speed and cheap compute of the AI to your advantage. Don't just generate one diagram. Generate 10 different candidate versions. Then you, the human expert, sit down and pick the best one.
It fundamentally shifts the scientist's role in the process. You go from being the draftsman, spending hours drawing boxes, to being the curator.
Which is the exact macro trend we are seeing everywhere in artificial intelligence right now. The human moves to the end of the pipeline to act as the final judge.
So let's zoom out for a minute as we wrap this up. We essentially have a virtual cartoon banana that can read a highly technical paper and draw a convincing methodology diagram. What does this actually signal for the broader field of AI?
I think it represents a massive paradigm shift from simple understanding to actual communication. We've spent the last 3 or 4 years just being constantly amazed that large language models can read and summarize dense topics.
Right. Wow, it understood the paper.
Exactly. But PaperBanana is showing that AI is crossing a new threshold. It can now teach those complex topics back to us. It's actively bridging the gap between raw, abstract data and human cognition. It's translating dense math into the visual spatial language that our primate brains actually prefer and understand intuitively.
It makes the bleeding edge of science vastly more accessible, but I actually have a slightly more provocative thought for you on that note.
Oh, let's hear.
We use diagrams to convince people, right? A clean, professional, highly polished diagram naturally makes a weak ideal look much stronger. It's almost like a pretty privilege for algorithms and data.
It's a very good point.
If an AI can instantly generate high-authority, incredibly convincing diagrams for literally any text prompt, are we eventually going to be flooded with junk science that just looks incredibly credible?
That is a very real, very present risk. As humans, we heavily rely on production value as a proxy for truth. If a preprint paper has a messy, hand-drawn diagram with overlapping text, we subconsciously think, oh, maybe they didn't put a lot of rigorous effort into this. But if it features a sleek, perfectly aligned PaperBanana-generated diagram, we automatically assume the underlying math must be equally solid.
Right. It hacks our trust sensors.
It does. As these automated communication tools get better and more ubiquitous, we, the human readers and peer reviewers, are going to have to get much, much sharper at looking past the aesthetic polish. We have to ruthlessly check the actual scientific substance. The critic agent can't just exist inside the Python code. It has to be active in our heads, too.
I love that. We all have to be the critic agent now. Well, if you want to judge the outputs for yourself, we have linked the original paper in the show notes. I highly recommend you open it up and look at Figure 2.
Oh, yes. That's the best part.
It's amazing because, ironically, the complex diagram explaining the multi-agent architecture of PaperBanana was entirely generated by PaperBanana itself.
It is the ultimate AI selfie.
It really is the ultimate selfie.
Yeah.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Next time you see a cartoon banana, maybe show some respect. It might be designing the graphics for your next big presentation. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye.